All right, my English teacher friends. So in this video workshop, I've put together something that I call voice lessons, balancing the tier 2, the vernacular, the colloquial, and exercise and sophistication. So I'm pretty active in the AP circles, and we've talked a lot in the AP groups, in particular on Facebook, about the elusive sophistication point, that it's really difficult for a kid to earn that point, to write with the pizzazz, the flair, the alacrity needed to really transcend the rubric. But the question is this: how do you teach that? Like, apart from just practicing and cranking out composition after composition after composition, how do you get into the nitty gritty and crank the wrenches on a kid's voice? So this lesson achieves to do that. So it's a kind of a break away from doing straight up nuts and bolts composition and making it a little bit more entertaining and a little more skillful, so that students have a chance just to practice and get creative with that voice, in the hopes of making it more academic, less contrived. Some of our students think that using a million dollar words is the equivalent of good writing, and other students, their voices are just way too small. So what do you do to augment it? What do you do to bring it into a proper wheelhouse, a proper balance? So we're going to talk about that teeter-totter effect in this exercise. So here are the directions for it. I want my students to choose any classic Disney bedtime story and narrate it while teeter-tottering the tier 2 vernacular and colloquial. So I'm going to pause there because some of you might be new to my instruction, new to my YouTube channel, and might not know what I mean by tier 2. With my students, I get them the day after Labor Day, and I have them all the way until the early 20s of June. And they come to me, most of them, with these little small voices, and there's a definite gaping vocabulary void. So I do something called an intensive Word Study Academy throughout the course of the academic year. And it's all, geared to really augment students' diction and get their diction to be a little bit more academic precise and deliberate, and then instead of just haphazardly choosing words. So by tier 2, I simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. And I contend that one key element of sophistication is that teeter-totter balance between using those tier 2 level words, but you got to have some swagger in there and be able to bust out a little vernacular and a little colloquial from time to time as well, because we don't want our students to sound overly pedantic and like automatons. So they can locate their story on a fantastic website called archive.org. Most of the classic Disney stories are on archive.org, and they have the actual pictures to the story, which I'll show you in just a second, that kids can cut and paste and put into their Canvas slides as they rewrite the story. So the idea is they're going to recreate the book in Canva. We have free Canva accounts at our school. They're free for all of your kids. They just don't do the paid subscription version of it, and you can do this. You can do it in PowerPoint as well, or even in Google Slides, but we have Canva accounts here. And then refer to the exemplars and models of the AP Dream Team and the Coffee Shop Hipster, which I'll show you in just a second. So my students did, Bambi, Dumbo, I forget the guy's name, Humpty Dumpty. Some of them did Cars, Cinderella, Snow White, classic Disney tales. And then we got to get into a philosophical discussion here. Can voice even be taught? So some teachers have said, Christian, you're nonsensical, you're ludicrous thinking that this can be taught. Kids either have it or they don't. On day one, when they enter your class, they either innately congenitally have that voice and that swagger, or they don't. And it just can't be taught. It's an ineffable, intangible trait of composition that you just can't teach. And I disagree with that. I think we can create exercises in nuance to cultivate that voice, the rhythm, the flow that excellent writers have. And it's an integral part of something that I run called the Nuance Academy, which we'll get into a tad with this particular video. So ultimately, I want my students to turn on their best academic selves. Get rid of those small little tiny voices, but don't geek out so much that it sounds pretentious, that it sounds contrived. A nice teeter-totter balance of all three of those, the colloquial, the vernacular, the academic, is how you turn on your best academic self. So one of the things that I talk about with my AP students, but I also do it with my on-level students, is identify voices that do it right. And there's a lot in the pop cultural realm, voices that our students know that do this very well. And I call it the AP Dream Team Voice Masters. So it's Christmas time at the time of the recording. And adult narrator Ralph from A Christmas Story has the type of voice that would crush the sophistication point. He'd write sixes all day long on Lang and Lit if he were to sit down and write for the exam. That voice is perfect, and the College Board loves that voice. Rory Gilmer, David from Schitt's Creek, Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City, Niles Crane, Fraser Crane, Chris from Northern Exposure. The list goes on and on and on. It's really fun to have that conversation with students and say, who's an AP Dream Team voice master? And then try to emulate that voice. And so as students are writing their Disney revisions here, their revisionist histories of Disney stories, I say maybe you want to embody and kind of personify one of these voices or somebody that we've identified from the AP Dream Team and pretend to be that person. So again, it's all that balance. You got to balance out that voice. Academic Tier 2, colloquial, vernacular. So I give my students some examples of the AP Dream Team just to get a sense, and I'll do that for you as well. So classic Ralph line from A Christmas Story. Do you remember when he swore and he got the soap put in his mouth and his response to it was, "Over the years, I got to be quite a connoisseur of soap. Though my personal preference was for Lux, I found that Palmolive had a nice piquant after-dinner flavor, heavy but with a touch of mellow smoothness." Right? That's the kind of swagger, pizzazz, flair, spunk that we want our students to write with. This is how you get the sophistication point, but how do you get there? So in my Nuance Academy, I use something a lot. It's kind of a staple of all of my teaching. It's a textbook called Write It Right with Strunk and White, Celebrating the Elements of Style, 1918 to 1979. It's a public domain text, so it's free. I just download a PDF and put it in Google Classroom for the whole year. And my Nuance Academy is basically a skill workbook that I built over the years where I take the concepts and the theories and the techniques of Strunk and White, and I've gamified things. I've done a lot of edutainment exercises, but really shoring up the grammar, the punctuation, the syntax, the voice, the rhythm, and flow. So building those foundational literacies through that Nuance Academy. So you're going to see my students be pretty well versed in this kind of stuff. One thing in particular is rule number 18. They make the assertion that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So it's really important for voice, for sophistication in particular, to be the masters of syntax. You got to be able to manipulate your syntax for the purpose of achieving voice, rhythm, and flow. And you'll see my students do that quite well in the exemplars that I'm going to share with you in just a second. So here's another one, Wonder Years, adult narrator Kevin Arnold. Once upon a time, life was simple, evolutionarily speaking. Then things began to change. The competition got tougher. There were winners and losers. The struggle continued. So note all these short, simple declarative sentences. Then in the fall of 1970, a new creature appeared, the likes of which had never been seen before. Noble, upright, virtuous, ninth grade man, master of all he surveyed, which in this case was Woody's Pizza Barn, where the elite went to meet. Yep. By the last week of summer, I was feeling pretty good about myself. And again, that teeter-totter balance of the colloquial, the vernacular, the academic tier 2, I think, in my estimation, is one good way to inch a student toward sophistication point. So another character that I loved growing up as a child of the 90s was Chris Stevens of Northern Exposure. He's another AP Dreamcast member. He's got the voice points all day long. So listen to how he writes. There's a dark side to each and every human soul. We wish we were Obi-Wan Kenobi, and for the most part we are, but there's a little Darth Vader in all of us. Thing is, this ain't no either-or proposition. We're talking about dialects, the good and the bad merging into us. You can run, but you can't hide. My experience? Face the darkness, stare it down, own it. As Brother Nietzsche said, being human is a complicated gig. So give that old dark night of the soul a hug. Howl the eternal yes. Like Chris Stevens is probably my favorite dude of all time. So I tried to emulate this guy as a young little 15-year-old kid. I wanted to be Chris Stevens in the worst way. And I used to try to write in his voice as I was learning my writing chops. And it's good for students to see this, to give them a sense of what you're looking for in this exercise. So as always, you gotta Bob Ross your instruction for this to happen. And what I mean by that is position yourself as the expert writer in the class and paint a few exemplars and models for your students so that they get a sense of how to do this, because this is tricky. So what I've done in this writing workshop video is I'm going to show you one of the better samples that my students did. I wrote my exemplars on Know David, which is in my YouTube channel, and Where the Wild Things Are. So I choose two books that my students cannot use because I don't want them stealing my thunder and just, you know, kind of mimicking what I'm doing stylistically. So Know David and Where the Wild Things Are in my YouTube channel. And the example that I'm going to share with you is from the Three Little Pigs, the Disney version of Three Little Pigs. Now, the big thing before we get into looking at that example is this. I tell my students to exercise the pause. And I just think by being in existence for 15, 16, 17 years, they have Velcroed thousands of words, tier 2 level words, into the deep recesses and folds of their memories that they just need to retrieve. And as they write, oftentimes students don't pause. I know as a writer myself, like I've published a few collections of poetry, a few textbooks. I'll be writing, and I'll pause and say, what's the right word? What's the best word? What word am I looking for? And it's usually I'm trying to retrieve a tier 2 level word, and then boom, it comes. Students need to be trained to do that and exercise that habit of mind. So without further ado, let's take a look at the Three Little Pigs. Now you may be wondering, where do these illustrations come from? This student got these right from archive.org. So what they do is just cut and paste the illustration into their Canvas slide, and then on that slide write their narrative point of view, write the story. So as an example here, they cut and pasted this picture from page 1 of the book, and then all this language over here is the student trying to retell the story. So here it is. The mother of 3 disinclined freeloading pigs goaded her children out of the proverbial nest and told them to shack up in their own abode of their own making. The 3 pigs happily obliged and made haste to embark upon this new journey of independence and autonomy. So you can see here this teeter-totter balance, colloquial, vernacular, tier 2 academic, right? So you don't want to overdo one at the expense of the other. It has to be balanced, and this student is doing that nicely out of the gate. And you just go page by page through the book. So the next page, you have this image, and the student tells the story of this image. Given that these moochers knew nothing of the things of work ethic and the requisite discipline to procure an honest dollar, the first pig approached a farmer hoisting a Sisyphean load of straw on his back. Can I have a bale or two to build a home for myself? So I encourage my students to include quotes in it, to include dialogue, and to hold true to the voice of the character, right? Or, you know, really stretch it if you want to. But great diction here. Sisyphean load of straw, you know, the requisite discipline to procure. Moochers is good colloquial vernacular, right? So Just proceed through it like that. I'll show you the rest of it here. So, third picture. The second brother, just as much as a parasitic scrounger as his other siblings, came upon a stolid-faced laborer and requested a few bundles of free sticks for which to construct his abode. May I pretty please have some sticks so that I have a comfortable place to live? And the third brother, unaware of just how fortuitous and fickle fate can be, stumbled upon a mason and procured enough bricks to vouchsafe all the portents he could not yet foresee. Here you go, little buddy. Happy building. All right. So again, it's really this teeter-totter balance here, and it's a great exercise just to practice it. Just practice keeping everything in balance. Sound natural. Stay in your wheelhouse. Don't overdo it. Don't get pretentious. Don't sound contrived. Don't have that impression that $1 million words is the equivalent to good writing. It all needs to be balanced. So next page. Eureka! With jubilation and cheer, all three brothers stood back in amazement and gazed upon the fruits of their labors. Each home was a perfect dwelling, safe from the elements, comfortable. Look at what we've done with our own 2 hands, said all 3 pigs. And then a mendacious and deviously wicked wolf snickered. Who do these bacon-strip jabronis think they are? I'm a huff and puff their jerry-crafted homes to smithereens. And then he unfurled a tumultuous billow of breath. All right, this is excellent. This was probably one of the better ones out of the class stack. He, the portly one built a house of sticks. The mere thought of the havoc that was about to rain made the wolf shudder with delight. So these are all this is the words of the students. The student is retelling the story. So look at the picture, tell the story. Teeter-totter balance. With yogic certitude, the wolf drew in the biggest breath he could, and asunder went the house of sticks. Presumptive and cocksure, the wolf approached the third home, certain that a trifecta of chaos and tumult would ensue. His dainty knock did not give away his intent. With ineffable gale-force ferocity, the wolf huffed and puffed, but to no avail. The house would not budge a single inch from its axis. Undeterred, the wolf scaled the walls, determined to eat a corpulent pig or 2 for his nightly victuals. I see you, you little fatty. I love the use of dialogue that this kid used. Kerplop. Fate sometimes has a way of inverting itself, and so the wolf found himself playing the role of a veritable rotisserie delicacy dangling from an unforgiving spit, and the pigs laughed with the silliest gaiety they had ever known. And for the rest of that evening and into the next, the 3 pigs made potty jokes that would make every scatologist titter wildly. I love this. I thought this was very well done and exceptionally well crafted, and that's the gist of how to do this exercise. So again, the kids can choose any, we kept it to the Disney stories because they're on archive, but if you go into archive, you can find just about any book you want. So, I had a student that was really hell-bent on doing Harold the Purple Crayon. Another student wanted to do The Very Hungry Caterpillar. They got all nostalgic and wanted to do stories from their childhood. So I opened up the floodgates. So this was, just one example of how to do it. But you can see there that very delicate balance. It's a juggling act of the colloquial, the vernacular, the tier 2 academic. So this is kind of like at the heart of one of the exercises I do in my Nuance Academy. And I have hundreds of these that I do between my Word Study Academy, my Nuance Academy, and they're all integral components of my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind, which I run through the National Writing Project. So if you're interested to learn more about my PD offerings through the National Writing Project, feel free to go to www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So that's teachinghowthe2write.com. And if you're interested in procuring these slides for yourself so that you have some exemplars and models to use for your students so that you're Bob Ross in your instruction, teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. So hopefully you found this to be useful. And for now, happy teaching, happy writing, and good luck tracking down that sophistication point with your students.